The island of Cyprus is the third largest island in the Mediterranean Ocean after Sicily and Sardinia. Of all the Mediterranean islands, it has had the most influence over Egypt and the Levant, for it lies around 100 kilometers away from Syria and 380 kilometers from Egypt. Over the course of history, many attacks were launched from Cyprus upon the Arab shores of the Levant and Egypt. Muslim leaders began to take notice of the impact of the island since the Rashidun Caliphate in the early years of the Islamic conquests. In turn, the Muslims launched many military attacks on Cyprus, as well as signed numerous treaties with its rulers, many of which were breached repeatedly. During the Crusades, Cyprus was a major naval stronghold for the Crusader armies.
Cyprus became a stronghold for launching attacks on the shores of Egypt and the Levant.
In spite of the end of the Crusades against the Arab world in the 8th century of the Hijra, the attacks from Cyprus did not stop, the deadliest of which was a campaign led by the King of Cyprus, Pierre de Lusignan, targeting Alexandria in Egypt. This attack entailed grueling massacres, and the same was repeated on Levantine shores, concentrating on Tripoli in modern-day Lebanon. The general who was commissioned to put an end to these assaults and to counterattack with corrective campaigns was none other than the Mamluk Sultan Ashraf Saifuddin Barsbay.
Because of the borders between Palestine and the Levant, there were some attacks and political conflicts that arose amongst the Mamluk rulers, or from the invasions that came from the east, for Alexandria was the primary receptor of European invasions that arrived via the Mediterranean, whether they were the Crusaders or who the Arab historians refer to as the Faranja or Franks, as the term Crusader is a European Latin-based term and not Arabic or Islamic. On one of the occasions, the Crusaders or Frankish forces came here and captured Alexandria. The campaigns usually received supplies from Cyprus, and the King of Cyprus also joined the attacks, because Cyprus was in fact one of the assailers in the invasion that eventually resulted in the subsequent capture of Alexandria.
The King of Cyprus, at that time, set out many attacks that provoked the Mamluk leaders. In 826 Hijra, the Cypriots seized a Mamluk merchant ship, and then another two, and at one point, the Mamluk Sultan attempted to send a gift to the Ottoman Sultan Murad II, but the ship carrying the gifts was assaulted and captured by the Cypriots, and that aggravated the Sultan Ashraf Barsbay.
Barsbay led 3 consecutive campaigns against Cyprus from Alexandria around the late 20s of the 9th century of the Hijra, or the 20s of the 15th century CE. In the last campaign, Barsbay took control over the whole island of Cyprus, and so Cyprus came under Mamluk rule and stayed that way for around 90 years.
We're now in the heart of Alexandria's Sea, or the Mediterranean, which we can see from the city of Alexandria. This sea was constantly filled with fishermen and traders, but it often gave entry to invaders as well. During the reign of Sultan al-Ashraf Barsbay, the famous Mamluk Sultan, the city was prone to see attacks from the islands of the Faranja, led by the King of Cyprus. Attacks usually came from Cyprus, but also from Malta. The King of Cyprus headed an army of Faranja forces and was able to overcome the defences of Alexandria and the Mamelukes who ruled the land, and was able to control it for a short while during the reign of Ashraf Barsbay. But the invaders were soon chased away and they were eventually overcome.
As it is said, this now leads to the safeguarding of the Egyptian and Levantine shores against the invading forces which disrupted trade in the area. And in truth, the Islamic sources make note of the extreme strength of the campaigns led by Barsbay, as it is said that he was able to take the very king of Cyprus hostage. And we find that Barsbay mounted the king of Cyprus on a horse and paraded him in the streets of Cairo, symbolizing Barsbay's great victory in that battle.
Barsbay al-Ashraf was a very famous and capable warrior, a strong-willed knight. He indeed led several incursions or raids on Cyprus, 3 in number to be specific, and reached the capital in his 3rd attempt. He defeated the Crusaders, who, at the time, were invading the Arab and Muslim lands across the sea from this base of operation.
Al-Ashraf Barsbay's military pursuits were facilitated by a previous Mamluk Sultan who took it upon himself to end the final Crusader presence on the shores of the Levant, concluding Saladin's al-Ayyubi's mission by liberating the city of Akka or Acre in Palestine, the ultimate and most dangerous of the Crusader strongholds. This Sultan is Al-Ashraf Khalil bin Qalawun.
The Sultan Khalil ibn Qalawun grew up in Egypt at a time when the Crusaders' occupation cast its shadow over a large part of the Islamic world. People were still breathing the winds of victory and the liberation of the Holy City, and more recently the Battle of Ain Jalut, or the Spring of Goliath, in which the Mamluks defeated the Tartar army. His father, the King Mansur Qalawun, was a mujahid against the Crusaders, and so Ashraf grew up amidst the glory of striving for Islam and did not succumb to the humiliation of occupation.
Despite the great victories that took place prior to the birth and emergence of Sultan Khalil Qalawun, the Crusader strongholds that remained scattered on the Levantine shores, especially the Kingdom of Acre, were a constant source of distress for the whole region.
Upon his accession, Sultan al-Ashraf immediately took to fighting a series of battles against the Crusader Kingdom of Acre, and was able to cleanse the Levantine shores of the Crusader presence.
In the year 690 of Hijrah, 1291 CE, Sultan al-Ashraf al-Khalil Qalawun began a huge military operation comprised of Egyptians and Levantines to siege the Crusaders in Acre, shelling the city with catapults until it caved in and surrendered. He continued his military campaigns to liberate the cities of Tyre, Sidon, Beirut, Haifa, and Tartus, and with that came the end of the 200-year Crusader occupation of the Levant.
Al-Sharif ibn Qalawun purified the city of Acre in the year 690 Hijri, a century and a year after the death of the great Saladin. Al-Sharif ibn Qalawun, may Allah raise his stature in the heavens above, for he's one who purified the Levantine shores of the last Crusaders.
Damascus hosted a great reception for the Mamluk Sultan who ended the Crusader occupation of the Levant. Al-Ashraf al-Khalil bin Qalawun appointed Ibn Sal'us, a merchant of Damascus, as his vizier, and also commissioned Sunjar al-Qila'i to renovate the citadel of Damascus.
The truth is that Al-Ashraf, apart from being a revolutionary warrior, showed a great deal of talent and precision in 2 other fields, architecture and the rooting out of corruption. He is credited with renovating and continuing the construction of the citadel of Damascus, depending almost entirely on one of his viziers, Sunjar al-Qila'i, who was in fact one of King al-Ashraf's most trusted viziers and his confidant in many matters.
The Cairo reception was very festive in celebration of the victories and triumphs of Ashraf al-Khalil in the Levantine states, but the festivity did not last for long, as the Mamluk emirs did not fare well with the presence and success of the vizier Ibn Sal'us, who was appointed by Ashraf Qalawun, and so they joined forces to plot against the vizier.
This vizier had a very negative impact on Sultan al-Ashraf, as he instigated him to turn against his vice-sultan, the Emir Badr al-Din Baydara, and drove him to confiscate all of the emir's property, although he knew that the Mamluk emirs were all struggling and fighting for the throne of the sultanate, and so a battle ensued.
Al-Ashraf Khalil sent for Ibn Salus to be inducted as vizier, and when he made him vizier, he entrusted him with all governmental matters, so much so that state officials, top religious clerics, major commissionaries, and generals were all under his command. It is also said that he would not leave his home for work without being accompanied by a large convoy of officers, bureaucrats, and state officials.
But the most fateful victim of the plot against Ibn Sal'us was the Sultan himself, as he was assassinated in the 693rd year of Hijrah, 1293 CE, at the very tender age of 26.
As the Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil confiscated most assets of his deputy, Badr ad-Din Baydara, everything changed. The deputy turned against his leader and found this the perfect chance for revenge, conspiring with a number of Mamluk emirs to kill the Sultan. The Sultan could sense his impending fate, so appeased his deputy, trying to mend what his vizier Ibn al-Salus had irreparably damaged. But it was too late, as Badr al-Din had already schemed with the rest of the Mamluks to assassinate the Sultan. And indeed, on a hunting excursion, the Sultan was attacked by the Mamluks, which was of course headed by Baydara, who struck the Sultan with a sword and then left him to the rest of the pack, who ravaged him to death, thus ending the reign of Ashraf al-Khalil ibn Qalawun.
This absolute power that was given to Ibn Salus by the Mamluk Sultanate is what bred the hatred, schemes, and plots against him, resulting in his assassination, similar to that of a few viziers before him who also enjoyed absolute power during their time, especially since the Mamluks did not allow for viziers to hold so much power, in the except for Ibn Salus and a few others like him.
It is noted here that both Ashraf al-Khalil and Barsbay witnessed many trials and tribulations during their periods of rule, ensuing their overseas victories. Both also worked towards rooting out corruption in their governments by putting limits to financial and social benefits acquired by powerful men and state officials, constricting their authority and influence, which were policies that brought the Ashraf al-Khalil and Barsbay many complications.
He knew that wars always bred a special class of corrupt men who invested in the bloodshed of people, and in fact, he started his war against corruption, not knowing that this war would lead to his own demise. Regardless of his military victories against the enemy, he found himself face to face with those holding the highest positions in the royal court, people who were taking advantage of this mayhem. Despite his numerous victories, he found himself the victim of a lowly plot led by Lajin, one of his own generals, and also Qutbugha, who was ranked a vizier. They both schemed against him and killed him. appointing his brother al-Nasir as the head of the Mamluk Sultanate. It was a painful turn of events in the history of this ambitious lad, who sacrificed himself and fought victorious wars against the enemy. He in fact was destroyed by his fight against corruption, which devours nations like a ferocious beast until they diminish and fall.
As for Ashraf Barsbay, he was more assertive in dealing with corruption and the retaliation of these corrupt officials and dignitaries. He died of natural causes after ruling for 16 years, as opposed to Ashraf al-Khalil, whose reign did not last more than 4 years, spending most of them in fighting the wars against foreign invasion and internal corruption.
The 4 years that Al-Khalil Qalawun spent in rule were very unstable. From the year 689 until 693 after Hijrah, these 4 years were indeed chaotic. Al-Khalil took the Sultanate after the death of his father, Al-Mansur, but in fact, the situation was highly complicated, as the Crusades that were stamped out 20 years before were being launched once again, and so he was faced with a huge responsibility.
Both the sultans grew up in the Saladin citadel in Cairo, in the shadows of royalty and grandeur. The Cairo citadel witnessed the allegiance of all the Mamluk rulers.
The Sultan Ashraf Qalawun, of all the leaders of the Mamluk dynasty, was born and bred in this castle, and most of the events of his long life unfolded within these walls.
This castle witnesses all the events and the interactions which took place during the rule of Al-Ashraf Barsbay.
The Sultan Ashraf Barsbay was born here and lived here and ruled here.
Al-Ashraf Barsbay is one of the well-known sultans of the Mamluk dynasty. He took the throne in the year 825 of Hijrah and reigned until about 841 Hijri, which is around 16 years.
The walls of the citadel bear witness to the brave campaigns that Al-Ashraf Barsbay led to fight corruption.
The life and times of the Sultan Al-Ashraf Barsbay took place here at the Saladin citadel of Cairo. The term Al-Ashraf was a title and not a name, and most of the sultans of the Mamluk period carried this title. Al-Ashraf is derived from the word Ashraf, a title given to the descendants of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, or to those close to his lineage.
The Sultan Ashraf Barsbay faced numerous internal conflicts during his rule, and he was successful in suppressing them all.
Barsbay faced many problems in Egypt, especially in commerce, as the merchants played with the prices, and when the Sultan Barsbay was in power, he tried to alleviate taxes imposed upon the Egyptian people. He also wanted to pressure the Mamluks to eradicate corruption, and was indeed successful in doing so after a specific fashion.
Also in the citadel, the fatal schemes were plotted at the hands of the rebellious Mamluk emirs, claiming the life of Al-Ashraf Khalil bin Qalawun.
Here in the Saladin citadel, Al-Ashraf ibn Qalawun was made sultan, and the stormy events of his reign all unfolded in this very place.
The events which took place during the reign of Al-Ashraf Khalil bin Qalawun did not give him the chance to erect prominent architectural monuments like most of the Mamluk sultans, as opposed to Al-Ashraf Barsbay, who erected 3 large mosques, one of which stands to this day at Al-Mu'azz Lidin Allah Street in Cairo. although the reign of Ashraf Khalil bin Qalawun and that of Ashraf Barsbay are divided by a substantial period of time in between. They were both prominent markers which liberated the area from the remnants of the Crusades, putting an end to all foreign interference in Egypt and the Levant, and purging the land of internal corruption.